Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining our session today on understanding ourselves and others using the DISC behavioral analysis tool. My name is Jeff Scott, and I'm the CEO of Section 810 Communications, and it's a pleasure to provide this session to all of you today. We're certainly in very unique and unsettling times, and we're trying to take advantage of some of this downtime, if you will, to provide some services in the area of soft skills, be it working from home, communication skills, or today, the DISC personality assessments. Now, in today's session, we have a group of panelists. I'm very pleased to have them join, and about halfway through the session, they'll be coming on with video so that we can have a little bit of a panel discussion as they represent different aspects of the DISC personality assessment tool. Now, before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As we conduct these sessions and have audiences from all over the world, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that while your line is muted, you do have the opportunity to communicate with us using the questions and comments area in your control panel. You'll see that you have the opportunity to ask a question of the staff. By all means, as we go through the presentation, go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll be able to see those and answer them either through the session or at the end where we've left time in today's presentation to read some of those questions out loud and provide an answer to you and the entire audience. You'll also have an opportunity to participate at different times where we may ask you to answer a question and to show us you're still with us and participate. And you can do that by actually raising your hand. Again, you'll notice in your control panel that you have an icon in the shape of a hand. At this point, what I'd like to do is make sure if you can see a welcome slide and hear my voice clearly, go ahead and raise your hand, just so I know that everybody is with us and you can see that. Excellent. If you can't find a hand, don't worry. I know that some systems may not show that, but it looks like I've got just about all the hands up. Again, good morning. A special welcome to some of my friends that are joining us from the Quantitative Finance Club out in Russia. Privyet. It's great to have you with us as well. So as I go through today's session, here are some of the things that we'll be talking about. We'll provide a quick introduction to what is DISC, the direct, inspiring, and steady and conscientious types of personalities. How does DISC get applied? There are a number of different areas that this can be applied, and we'll speak specifically today of how people perceive and respond differently to conflict and stress, which is such a relevant topic today with so many changes that we're all dealing with on a regular basis that we're certainly not expected or anticipated. As I mentioned, we'll go through a panel discussion where I've got several team members from Section 810 Communications on the phone, including representatives from Singapore and Russia and Switzerland, as well as some of us locally here in the New York area. DISC behavioral analysis and studies, this is not a new concept. And I won't go into a lot of detail here because we're going to go through a lot of information in a short period of time. But the study of behavior goes back into the 400s BC. Some of these studies even focused on abundance of various body fluids in some of the Hippocrates studies. Going forward in the 1920s is where DISC really had its birth. And there are a number of tools that are available today that are designed to help us understand ourselves. Now, it's really important to recognize that this is not about putting us in a box. A lot of people look at personalities of trying to label people or label themselves. That is absolutely not what DISC is all about. At the end of the day, we're all very complex human beings. We're unique. And what we want to do is better understand ourselves, our inherent strengths and challenges or obstacles, our communication style, to better understand how we respond and to leverage, maximize our strengths, and also understand people around us so that we can have more effective communication. So the DISC element, if you will, comprised of 4 different areas: D, or a direct personality; I, or inspiring; S, or steady. C, or conscientious. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail today. Time won't permit us to go into everything, but to give an overview of what these really mean, and hopefully some of you will be able to determine where you think you may fall into this scale. It's really important to note that there is absolutely no such thing as good or bad, right or wrong, better or worse. Again, we're all unique. Everyone has strengths, and we all have challenges as well. If you notice in the top of the chart, direct and inspiring, DI personality types, they tend to be more outgoing, more extroverted. Whereas the conscientious, steady, the C and S, they tend to gravitate more towards a reserved or an introverted nature. Similarly, on the sides of the profiles, you see a DC, they primarily focus on more tasks. They're very task-oriented. Whereas the I and the S personalities tend to be a bit more people-oriented. And we'll dig a little bit more into that as we go through. DISC can be applied in a lot of different areas. At Section 810 Communications, we use DISC as a foundation for a number of the training offerings that we provide, whether it's leadership training, sales training, personal, professional growth. I was chatting with a friend the other day. They were actually interviewing for a job, and they were given a DISC assessment in the interview process. Why? Because it helps an employer or a manager know who their team is, so then they can make sure they have a well-rounded group, and they can leverage each other's strengths and help to offset each other. So there are a number of different areas that DISC can actually be applied, including outside of business and more of our personal relationships as well, because it's, again, about understanding ourselves and those around us. There are a number of elements that go into what shapes our behavior. And I use the word behavior here and not personality for a reason. People ask me frequently, does personality change over time? I personally believe that our personalities were born a certain way. However, our behaviors will change based on a number of environmental circumstances. The people who are around, role models, work, school, all these different elements comprise who we are. But I know from personal experience that there is an element of heredity that comes into play that defines who we are. And I know that because I'm the father of a large family. I have 9 kids. Yes, this is not a stock photograph. Usually people don't believe me or think I slurred my words when I say I have 9 kids. And the reason I mention this is same gene pool, same environmental upbringing, and just as my kids look differently, they act differently. I have some that are very strong D personalities, and then polar opposites that are S. And it's amazing as I've watched them grow up, and even at a young, early age, seeing their personalities manifest. So let's jump in. What does this really mean? And again, I'm going to be going through this information very quickly because I want to give an overview of what this is about, but really get into the panel discussion to talk about responses to conflict and stress. A D personality is a very control-oriented personality. They like authority. They're very known by their assertiveness. They love to achieve results and take action. That's very important for them. They're a multitasker and they're active. You can typically tell a D personality by their fast pace. They don't delay. They don't overthink things. They're very action-oriented. Their greatest fear is losing control. If you're a D personality, and we're going to talk a little bit, and Ksenia from our team will talk about how a D personality typically responds when they lose control, which many of us have lost right now with our current situation. Again, the strengths of the D are evident. They like to get things done. They're bold and they're confident, and they're not afraid of confrontation. Now, with all of these personalities, we're going to talk about strengths and then obstacles or challenges that we all have. Keep in mind that our strengths, no matter what personality, our strengths, when they're put under pressure, can become our weaknesses. So, for example, while a D personality is not afraid of conflict, one of their challenges is they're not afraid of conflict. And sometimes they can be a little bit more brash. They can be argumentative or come across in a cold way. It doesn't mean that everybody is like this. It just means that when put under pressure, we all have these challenges that may come up. Moving into an I personality, the inspiring personality or influential. These are individuals that tend to be persuasive, very friendly. Oftentimes they're known by their outgoing, gregarious smile and even laughter. They're very motivating to others. They're known very often as storytellers. While a C personality, and we'll talk about that in a moment, tends to focus on facts and statistics, an I personality tends to gravitate away from statistics and facts and prefer more to speak on a personal level and in stories. Their greatest fear is rejection. Social acceptance and approval, recognition, incredibly important to an I personality, and a lack of that is a challenge. In this current situation that we're facing with the pandemic, one of the challenges for an I is isolation. They like that social interaction, and that can be a challenge. So again, strengths of an I, they're charismatic. They're fun to be around. They're often known as being the life of the party. But just as the D personality has strengths that could become weaknesses, so does the I. And while an I personality can be the life of the party, sometimes the I personality has to be the life of the party. And under stress, again, that need for approval and recognition can be very, very strong. Self-care is something we're going to talk about a little bit later in the panel discussion. And it's really important as we understand ourselves to know what are the best things we can do to help ourselves get through situations. S personalities. S are very stable. They're very steady. They're very, very team-oriented. An S personality type is very typically consistent and very loyal, and they're easygoing. You can typically find an S personality by their calm demeanor. They're reliable, loyal. They're often looked to in a crisis because they can be very, very calming. That's just part of their nature. They can be very nurturing and care about others. Again, a very good team player. But their fear, and again, this is being hit in the current environment, is a loss of security. S's really don't like confrontation either. Where a D personality is not afraid of a confrontation, S tends to back away. But security and stability is really important, and one of the greatest fears of an S personality, and some of you may be feeling this now, is that loss of security. What you expected, the predictable nature of life has changed, and that creates a loss of security. Again, the strengths. S's are very hardworking, although they typically do it in quiet. They don't clamor for attention. They're a good team player. They're excellent at being mediators, and they're very peace-loving. An S personality can be incredibly easygoing, but again, as an obstacle, easygoing can lead to being too easygoing and maybe not having that self-motivation to get things done or to be quick from a decision-making or a decisive standpoint. And finally, to get into the fourth area, the C personality. C's are very conscientious. They're compliant. They go along with the program. They're very methodical and analytical, and they're process-focused. One of the things that you can identify about a C personality is they're very accurate and they're very, very detail and fact-oriented. One of the biggest fears of a C personality is criticism. Being criticized and being inaccurate. Those are common fears. And again, they tend to really gravitate towards being analytical and factual. And again, I know I'm going through this very quickly. We do plan on having a recording available, which will show the slides. So if any of you are taking feverish notes, and that would typically be someone in the C area who likes those facts and statistics, don't worry, we do plan on making this available. So a C personality, again, a lot of strengths, and their focus is on being very practical. They know that there's a right way to do things. Following protocol is important. So being accurate is one of the strengths, but just as with the others, sometimes being too accurate leads to perfectionistic tendencies. A C personality can be really, really hard on themselves. And one of the things that I see with some of my friends and colleagues who are high C personalities, in this current environment that we're in, they can be really hard on themselves. And they just don't cut themselves slack because accuracy is so important. And right now it's critical to make sure that, again, we're all taking care of ourselves. So again, very quick overview into all these different personality types and how you might be able to identify yourself or others that are around you. But what about stress and conflict? We talked about some of the strengths, challenges that people innately and inherently have within their lives. How does that manifest in conflict and stress? Let's take a look at each one in a bit of detail as we prepare in about 5 minutes or so to bring on the panelists and talk more about this. The trigger for a D personality is typically a lack of control. When a D finds that they can't control things the way they used to, that can really be upsetting and unnerving to them because their needs are to go at a fast pace, to accomplish things and see results and have that authority. And some of that may be taken away in conflict and stress. And one of the responses that a D personality should watch for is that they don't try to over control things. It's very easy if you're a D, based on your nature, to want to reach in and control and fix things because you're fixers. It's important to be aware of that. I personalities, a big challenge and a trigger for an I personality is a lack of approval and recognition. Sometimes the inability to see people physically being someone's presence on a daily basis, as we did at the office, that can be a problem because their needs include, again, social interaction, attention and validation. And as silly as this sounds, eyes thrive on smiles and laughter. And in today's world, sometimes we're a little bit lacking in those smiles and laughters. We're filled with bad news. There's so many different things that we're all dealing with. And for an I personality, if you fit in this category, you're craving laughter. You're craving just seeing somebody and getting together socially. And your response might be to minimize or disregard some of the things that's happening because an I personality tends not only to see the glass as half full, but to say, wow, and that's a really pretty glass too. Because you're an optimist and you want to look at the bright side of things. Moving into S's. Again, S's are stable, they're steady, are calm personality. One of their biggest triggers is insecurity. And if nothing else, what our current environment has created is insecurity in all of us. There's a lack of predictability. And the big areas of need as far as being in conflict and stress for an S are bringing back some element of stability, making things stable wherever we can. A little bit of a slower pace for comfort. I was chatting with someone the other day, and one of the things they said is, as I'm working with other people, and it was clear that some of their colleagues were more of the D personality, they were fast-paced and wanted to get it done. And this person said, I need time. I just need to process. Making quick decisions is challenging. So their needs, and again, maybe you have employees or managers or coworkers that are this, they need a bit of a slower pace and they need that team environment. They need a support system. It's very important to have that team structured, stable environment. And a response for an S during this period of conflict and stress, maybe to submit, maybe a little bit too much, just to back off and submit in an effort to avoid conflict. And finally, before we get into the panel discussion, a C, their biggest trigger is a loss of structure. C's like to follow the rules. They like a very defined way to do things. Again, process and protocol are very important to a C personality. When that structure is taken away, that can cause conflict and stress. Some of their needs, and Yelena in just a moment is as the representative of the C group in our panel discussion, is going to talk about how facts and data and statistics become very important because that's a need for a C personality. They need accuracy. They don't want to read a story one day and find out the next day it was inaccurate. That will freak them out a bit. They need that accuracy. And again, if you're a manager and have people that are the C personality, they need guidelines. They need some directions and rules because they're excellent at following those, but they can't follow what they don't know. Lastly, their response, a C personality might withdraw. Because again, if you think of the original diagram, they're a little bit more on the reserve side, so that goes on steroids, if you will. They may withdraw to avoid that conflict. So again, we've gone through a lot of information very quickly, and I did that on purpose. I apologize and hope that you are all following along. The purpose of what we looked at so far is to give you an overview of what is DISC. What is the direct, inspiring, steady, conscientious types? How can you recognize things within yourself? How do you recognize within others? And again, we want to focus today on how stress and challenge and crisis can be a factor. So at this point, what I'd like to do is ask our panelists to come online. We have several people that are on board with us right now, and we're going to turn on our cameras if you give us a moment to come live and say hello to you in person. And as the cameras all come up, I'm really pleased and honored to be joined today by several of my colleagues and associates at Section 810 Communications. Ksenia in Switzerland, Sophia in Singapore, Yelena in Russia. And again, Section 810 Communications does have a global presence. And so we do offer training, and some of the team members are here representing those different areas. And Sahana, I'm pleased as a business colleague of mine to have joined here from the New York area, talking about your perception as well with the different aspects. So at this point, again, I'd like to encourage you as the audience members, type in your questions. We'll be looking at those as we go through the balance of the presentation. We'll take probably 15-20 minutes to go through a quick panel discussion, and then we'll look at some of the questions that you have. And I've asked Yelena, Ksenia, Sophia, and Sahana to join because each one of them tested out with their personal assessments at a little bit different level. And you see that on the screen. The chart that you're looking at is one of the aspects of their personal DISC assessment, specifically the area that focuses on how they respond to stress. This is our natural reaction when we're put in a bit of a pressure environment. And as you can see, Ksenia scored a bit higher on the D scale, Sophia was higher on the I scale, Sahana more on the S side, and Yelena on the C. So as we talk about their responses and reactions to what's happening right now, hopefully you as the audience will see a little bit of yourself and maybe get some ideas, some suggestions on how to put a handle on all of this so that you can walk away with some practical steps for self-care and for improving communication with people on your team or even your managers. Because even if you're not a manager or a leader, the people that manage you, they need help and encouragement at this point also. So Ksenia, I'm going to start with you because D's typically like to go first anyway. So when everything came about, I know that this was a challenge for many of us. Talk a little bit about how you first experienced this stress and how it manifested to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and it's very nice to be here and also very nice to see a lot of familiar names in the participant chat. Yeah, I want to tell a story of how I faced sort of the beginning of the pandemic. We've been hearing a lot of news from January, but you know, it's been in China. It was not applicable to us directly. And in the middle of March, when slowly the countries were starting closing borders, we saw some movement happening here in Europe. We were just about to go on the expedition to the north of Finland with my friends. 14th of March was the date when we were leaving. On the 13th of March, Slovakia closed its borders, and one of our friends was coming from there. And at that point, I was still in complete denial. I was like, we have to make it work. We cannot give it up. We planned this holiday, we planned this expedition for such a long time. We cannot just cancel it. Like, I don't believe it. I cannot give it up. I cannot lose this control. And it took me a couple of days, and I know some of my friends who are also on this call can relate to that, to realize it and stop convincing them that we have to go forward and we have to get through this together. And just realize that, yeah, I just have to sit down, relax, and realize that things are not in my hands anymore. I'm not in control. I cannot push through and get things done as I usually tend to do. So this was sort of.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Cindy, what did you do? One of the things that I know in talking to other friends and colleagues that are high D personalities, again, they want to control, they want to know that it's in their hands to do things. How did you address that? This is clearly out of your hands. What were some of the practical steps that you did to say, okay, I need to relinquish control a little bit? Give us some guidelines. What was helpful for you?
Well, I think it's the situation is very unusual for all of us. You know, usually if something is not in your control, maybe partially it's not in your control, but you can at least do something. And in this situation, a part of like realizing that I cannot do anything, I still tried for a long time, still to have this holiday week, still try to convince people that we should do it, still try to like push things through as I usually try to get things done. And, you know, after a couple of days, I just realized, well, I became really sad, to be honest. I realized I cannot do anything. I just have to stay still. I have to, you know, take a deep breath, as my husband says, and just relax.
And sometimes relaxing is hard to do as a D personality. Yeah. But Sophia, as you scored a bit higher on the I scale and across the board with the various elements of your assessment, you consistently scored high. You are an eternal optimist, having the pleasure of working with you not only now but in the past. I know that you look at things as the glass half full, and it's important for you to be around other people and have that social side. Talk about how it affected you with your I tendencies.
Yeah, so I think it's really challenging for me for this period of time. So actually, I'm in Singapore, so the lockdown of the country only happened from the beginning of the week. Right before this week, actually, I took everything as normal. So I still went out with friends, even though I know the virus was there, but I just want to be with my friends. So we still went out for dinner, hang out during the weekends. But from this week onwards, so the government really instilled this very, very tight rule. You will be fined up to 10,000 Singapore dollars if you if you break the rule of quarantine and go out for eating and gathering. So I really feel the pinch now. It takes more energy from me to work from home than to working with people in the office. So usually in the office area, I'm the active ones in the pantry and talk to people during the tea time. But so now after starting to really working totally virtually, I started to try to find people to talk. So starting from my parents on FaceTime, WeChat, and just try to get the normal socializing time as much as on the videos. But I still find it's very challenging because being alone in an area for long, I will get distracted easily. So sometimes I will be stopping from working and just looking at some games or watch videos. So yeah, so that's something that I find maybe from the personality test, I feel maybe that's the problem I'm facing. So currently I find some ways works very effective on me is so first of all, exercising. So because of this lacking of energy, you really need some adrenaline to push you up. So regular exercising, maybe one in the morning, like a long walk, and one in the afternoon for like a aerobic exercising, that really help you to change your condition. And thanks for working from home. Time is more flexible. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned being distracted, and I can relate to that as well. Sometimes as an I personality, that's one of the challenges is staying on task and focus. Whereas a C personality is incredible at being able to stay on task. Sometimes as an I, that's a bit more of a challenge. And when you're alone, even more so, because you're just that. You're alone. It's all up to you. And so to look around and see who can I talk to, and to be able to have that, I completely understand that. But that's good, and I agree. I think for all of us, being able to make sure we're exercising and taking care of our bodies, keep our minds active, and keep our bodies is incredibly important. So, Sahana, let's jump to the S personality. S, again, stable, steady, very predictable and calming, but not necessarily liking change, especially change that you can't predict. Talk about how this is impacting you.
Yeah, so my initial reaction to this was I was super worried. My parents are back in India and they're old, so there's nobody to take care of them. And I was very much worried about them. The second thing I was thinking of was like, how do I tackle this? Now, when I was looking at the Wuhan videos, I knew that there would be a complete lockdown in the United States and even in New York, right? So I was thinking about like what are the things, necessities that we will need like in the weeks coming forward if there is a complete work from home, we're not allowed to go out. That was my initial reaction. But I do feel like when things don't go according to plan, that's when I get really nervous. And in this situation, a lot of things did not go according to plan. I had my wedding coming up in the second half of the year, and that is postponed now. And I was supposed to be in India in the next month. That is also not going to be possible. So, I had my exams, even that got postponed. So it's like nothing's going according to plan, and that makes me feel really nervous and anxious about it. And I'm trying to deal with it. Like I know, because I cannot do anything and I don't expect a change, and that happens, I start to speculate whether is this change really needed in my life, or is there a way to avoid it. In this case, I know there is no way to avoid it, so I have to adapt. And I am learning, I'm trying to replan everything that I had previously done. I'm trying to see what are the next dates that are going to be available, and when do I start like my wedding plans and other things. So yeah, it is I am anxious about like what's going to come in the future. Let's see.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know people talk about doing virtual coffee times and virtual happy hours, but virtual weddings just doesn't sound, like it would be
Yeah.
an enjoyable thing. And so I'm sorry to hear that. I know when we talked the other day, you mentioned also that with an S personality, acceptance is really important. And when you were in the office, if you could see someone just being in their presence, sometimes that helped you to feel that validation that it was okay and you were okay. Talk just a bit about that, because I think a lot of people may be feeling that at home it's hitting them in different ways. And for an S, they want that approval and that acceptance. Maybe you can address that.
Yeah, I do feel the need to be in the office. I am not a person who likes to work from home, mainly because that personal touch, like when I can just go to the person and talk to them, the effect and the impact is much different compared to what you do on phones. That's one. And two, it's like I can see their reaction. Being able to see their reaction makes me feel a little insecure. Like suppose I come up with an idea, when I see my manager's reaction and my teammates' reaction, I know who is accepting it, who is in denial, who is in doubt. Whereas when I cannot see it on phone, like it makes me feel insecure. Like, okay, is my idea being accepted? Am I thinking in the wrong direction? I have no clue about it. I don't know how to, move forward, and that kind of puts me in a very insecure position. The way I'm trying to deal with it is like try to talk to them more and like reach out to people, and then once the meeting is done, and then I again reach out to them like one-on-one and try talking to them. What do you think had to be done, and what can be done better, and all of it. So it just like one-on-one feedback and all of it. So that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It's funny, you mentioned insecurity a couple times, and again, each of the personality attributes has their own challenges. Insecurity is one of the common challenges for an S personality. They may more easily have feelings of insecurity, and certainly this is creating that. So being alone and not having someone say, hey, Sahana, good job, or just giving you some validation of what you're doing, that can be a challenge. So I think it's good when you reach out and have more video calls, and we're all doing that more with different technology platforms, reaching out, and I'm sure others, Cynthia on the I side, to reach out on that social interaction, having virtual times together with other people. That's very important. Yelena, let's talk about C's for a minute, because when you and I talked the other day about isolation, you were basically saying, what's the problem? Isolation's not a bad thing. I'm a C personality. I'm good on my own anyway. Talk a little bit about how this has impacted you.
So first, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, yeah, that's true to that. Well, my first reaction to all this pandemic was very mild, actually, because I usually need to gather all the information before I can make any strong opinion about anything, and I had enough time for that. And because Russia wasn't the first country to face that, and we already had a lot of information at hand. And I did expect at some point before we had a lockdown, I did expect that we would be on quarantine and that we will have to be self-isolated. And well, I was okay with both courses of actions of situation, because although I do love having me time, I'm still comfortable with being around people, with communicating with people. But yeah, it's true that actually quarantine right now has two positive sides for me. First is, of course, self-isolation, and the other is that everything is kind of slowed down, and which means that I have enough time to contemplate, to analyze any situation that I'm facing, and basically I can react and make decisions at the pace that is comfortable for me. So that's good for me.
And I know you mentioned the other day when we were chatting, your first reaction, because that's one of the things when this all started happening in every country, and we have 4 different countries represented here today, but each country's at a different level of timing and pace with this. But one of the things we talked about is, what's the first reaction when things started happening and when we all started to feel that sense of angst, a little bit of anxiety, and we wanted to respond to that? You mentioned one of the first things you did was you went out to grab facts, and talk about that with the news.
Yeah, at first I was good with the amount of news that I got from my friends, because before March I had never been a news fan. I had never been interested in that, because my friends are always discussing something in the group chat, and that's enough for me. But in March, yeah, sometime at the beginning of March, I realized that everything was changing too fast, and things got kind of scary, and I needed to have more information. So I subscribed to news channel on YouTube. As a backup, I installed 2 news apps on my phone. I have notifications turned on, so I get news like every half an hour. I get news from Russia, from other countries, and that is kind of comforting, because although it's a little bit unnerving that I don't know what will happen, we're all in this together, so no one knows what will happen. And well, at least I know what is going on everywhere. I have some action items, and I have advice and instructions on how to treat the situation, how to stay safe, and how to behave in this situation.
Okay, that makes sense. And with the information, just like we talked about a D personality that may like to have control, but they may overreach and try to control everything. And so with the C personality, your focus is so much on facts and statistics. And sometimes, again, when it's pushed too far, did you find that you were getting overwhelmed with all the news, especially with the negative nature of the news, and you had to give yourself a break just to step away because it was too much facts coming in?
I'd say I really had a hard time at one point when we were on the verge of going on lockdown in Russia, and it was the day probably when the president announced that we are going in a lockdown for 1 week. And at that point, I had a bunch of confusing information at hand, like the government said it would be only 1 week lockdown, but all the facts indicated that it would last longer, but who knows how long. I also had 2 cats, and depending on whether I'm going away for 1 week, and at that point I wanted to go to my parents, to my hometown, not to stay in Moscow, because it's more dangerous in Moscow than in other cities. And yeah, so I had to make up my mind about cats. I also had a retake of an exam scheduled in April, and my school couldn't give me information about whether it will be postponed or not. And I think the most difficult, the most unnerving thing for me was that I realized that I could be a coronavirus carrier and not have symptoms. And I could go to my parents and infect them, and I wouldn't know that I was infected because there are cases. So, and the worst thing was that I had to decide whether I'm going to my hometown or not very fast. And because there were rumors that any trains, like any travel, would be forbidden in Russia soon. So it was a hard time. But well, I weighted all pros and cons, and I decided that the least thing I wanted was to be stuck in Moscow. And I'm not taking all the credit. Parents helped me a lot. Like, I talked to my mom, she brought me to my senses, so I made up my mind and I went to Nizhny Novgorod.
And knowing you, again, working together now and also previously, I know that you're a factual person and you weigh things out, which is a common attribute of a C personality, is to do that analysis and pros and cons and weighing it out. So I think there's so many different ways that we all respond to this, how we perceive it, how it affects us, and then how we respond. And our hope here, and I want to get into questions. So again, if you have questions, the audience, we've left time here for the next 15 minutes or so to answer some of those questions. I see there are some coming in, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. But the hope here is that by listening to people that represent various attributes or aspects of the DISC assessment tool, that you might feel something that resonates, something that would be specific to what you may be feeling or experiencing. And then to number one, know you're not alone. It's okay. We all respond differently. There is no right or wrong response to stress or to crisis, but to be able to have some encouragement and hope that these are some areas that other people hit, and these are some things that they've been able to do. And then understand what's important to you. Is it social? Is it facts? Is it having some control? Is it peace and nurturing others, just to be able to do that? So let's take a look at some of the questions that are coming in here. Bear with me as I move around a couple of things on the screen. Looks like we have just a few questions coming in. Before we get into the question too, I want to launch a quick poll for the audience. DISC is something that other people may have heard of, may have seen in an interview or some other way, or it might be something that's brand new. But based on what you've seen today and just our short conversation about this, I'd love to get an idea of how you think you would score. If you were to be given an assessment yourself to say, I feel like I relate more to a D, a direct personality, or maybe more the inspiring or that steady type, take a few moments here and just take a look. Where do you think you would be? And again, no right or wrong answer. This is just curiosity to see where the audience would line up. And I'll go over the results in just a minute as we go through that. Okay, so right now looks like we've got a strong showing in the C category. We'll give you just a few more seconds. If you haven't responded yet, where do you think you would land? As a D, an I, an S, or a C? Couple seconds and we'll close it down. Okay, so it looks like based on this, we've got about 13% that would consider themselves a D or direct, 27% each. We have a tie for the I and the S personalities, and let's change over, 25 each, and then 38% for conscientious. So interesting. So a fairly good distribution across the board here. So let me go ahead and close out that poll. So great, thank you all for participating with that. So let's take a quick look here. You know, one of the questions here is, what personality do I think I relate to the most? You know, and it's a funny question on FISA for that. People ask me that, and I usually like to have people guess where they think I might land in that area. The one thing I will say is I tend to score very high in the I personality. I enjoy being out and around people, and one of the biggest challenges for me in this process is being alone, being isolated. You know, I live with my youngest son who's 18 years old, and sometimes I think he says, "Dad, do we have to talk again?" Because I like to talk. I'm a talkative person. I need that social interaction. I've made sure from my perspective that I have that connection. I'll schedule virtual happy hours at least every week with some of my friends and colleagues. I even have my 84-year-old mother, who my sister got her set up on video chat with WhatsApp so I could see my mom and have a drink and say hi and give her a virtual hug. So for me, that I area is something that I really relate to very well. And as I mentioned before, our behaviors change over time. We learn to behave in a certain way, sometimes based on our occupation or on our relationships, but we're born a certain way. And I mentioned earlier my own family, because with my kids, I found at an early age, they demonstrated and manifest. One of my sons, Jonathan, is a high C personality. And quick story, when he was 4 years old, about to turn 5, he came to me, he said, "Dad, I'm going to be 5 years old next week." I said, "Okay, thank you for sharing that fact with me." He said, "And for my birthday, I would like 3 things. I would like this, this, and this." And with that, he turned around and walked away. I said, "Thank you, Jonathan." So when his birthday came, I got him this, this, and this, but as a loving father, I also got him this. And so he came down in the morning and he saw 4 presents on the floor and he said, "I said I wanted 3 things for my birthday." See, I broke protocol. There was a right way to do things, and in his mind, he knew how it was supposed to be. Now, some of my other kids, if I got them 4 instead of 3, they would say, "Where are the other 7?" Because they're all about themselves. And so it's so different how we all manifest. So that's a great question. Thank you for sharing it. Mike here has a great question. That's, what's the typical distribution of DISC personalities across a broad population? Is it evenly distributed or some personalities more prevalent? That's a really good question. And I've seen some statistics on it. And quite frankly, I'm not sure where the statistics lie. Years ago, I worked for a quantitative finance firm. We did algorithmic trading, and I did training around the world, the different offices, and this was a very quantitative role. And so a lot of the people that did the work scored in a C or an S area, especially C, because C is very analytical. So a couple things. In that environment, there were not as many of the I personality types. I find in general, you know, today's distribution was short on the Ds. It was the lowest percentage of Ds, but even with the I and S and heavy on C. I would say that C tends to be one of the more common attributes that people have. But again, a lot of it is training. When I would train those quants, a lot of them on their test will come out as an I. And they'd get nervous and they'd say to me, "Oh my goodness, I'm an I, but my job is completely a C. Am I in the wrong job?" And the answer was no. Anybody can do any job properly. But I would say if you're an I personality, you have social needs that are different than some of your colleagues who score high in C. For example, it's going to be difficult for you to sit behind a desk all day long coding in Python for 10 hours straight. You're going to have to get up, go to the coffee machine, have a game of ping pong in the lounge, do something to break up that monotony. So it wasn't so much that a personality was tied to a job, but it's recognizing how we respond to the demands of our job. So Mike, it's a great question, and I don't know if there is a black and white answer. I think people have tried to do that, but I question some of the validity of those statistics. So here's a question from Maria. Should I be worried if I scored -4 in one of the letters? Absolutely not, Maria. And the fact that you say worried gives me an indication of where that might be in those areas. There's absolutely nothing negative about this. Again, there's no right or wrong. If you look at the charts that are on screen right here, they're pretty modest. I'll use Sophia as an example. She scored high in the I chart, and she's a little bit lower on the C chart. That may mean that for Sophia, when faced with a crisis or stress, she's not going to drive towards facts and statistics. Yelena will. Sophia, she doesn't want to see it. And I would guarantee that Sophia hasn't downloaded a lot of news apps to fill herself with statistics. That's not her strength. So no, these tests are not about right, wrong, or should you be worried about something? Absolutely not. I've seen people that have scored very evenly across all 4 of these. They're very, I wouldn't say well-rounded, but they don't have any specific spikes. And I see others that are really high spike in one area and really low spike in another. It's just recognizing what's natural tendencies for us. And if anybody's interested, we've gotten some questions about the assessments. Part of what we do at Section 810 Communications is corporate training, and people who are interested in getting assessments, just reach out to us at info@section810.com. Today's session was not about offering assessments. They are available. What we really wanted to do today is talk about this and give you more of an understanding into how this all plays out. But some people do enjoy seeing their own personalized report and indicators of what they can do to improve different areas, or more importantly, maximize your strengths. So we are just about near the top of the hour here. So we'll give it just another minute to see if there's some other questions that we can go through here. Here's a great question from Doran, and it says, DISC does not measure any specific skill. So why would anyone risk using it during recruitment? That's a really good question. It's a very good question because, number one, you're right. DISC does not show skill. So in a job, for example, if I'm interviewing for a position in programming, I certainly want to make sure that the candidate coming in has good programming skills. There's the hard side of that. But if I'm interviewing that programmer, I may also have them involved in working groups. And if I have 5 people in a group and all 5 of them are on the C scale, as an example, or on the S scale, they may not be as effective as a team as far as collaboration than if they had a D and an I. For example, if I had a team that's all Ds, no matter how good their skills were, they're all going to be very control-centric and authoritative, and they're going to want to lead all the efforts. Similarly, if I had all S's on a team and I said, who wants to be the leader? They might all sit back and nobody would want to rush in and jump into that. So having a well-rounded team, focusing on the soft skills, I think is important. Certainly depends on the role being interviewed for, but it's a way to better understand who the team is and how people can be paired together. I used to do coaching, and I worked with a company that they had a very strong mentor-mentee relationship, but mentors were not managers. So they couldn't really force something to be done, but they could give suggestions. And sometimes they had conflict because the personalities didn't mesh well together. And I remember one time I asked a mentor, I said, what's the biggest challenge? And this individual said, my mentee doesn't listen to me. I said, okay, it's clear you have a strong D, you want to have that control and authority. So what do you do when they don't listen? He said, I sit back, I wait for them to fail, and 6 months later, I say, I told you so. I said, that's probably not the most effective way we could do that. Let's explore some other options. So understanding the inner dynamics of people working together is where DISC really comes into play. Thanks for that question, it's a good one. Allison has a question. I missed a bit of the presentation, may have covered this. Do you recommend this more for recruiting or team building? It's a great question, and it's not one versus another. Recruiting can be helpful to understand who your team is. But again, a decision based solely on DISC wouldn't be appropriate because there's too many other aspects in the recruiting area. It can be helpful there. I find that once you have people on a team, team building, making sure that your team is working together, leadership. We've done training where we teach people, this is how you can be more effective as a leader by understanding your people. As an example, I had someone who worked for me at one point. She was a very, very high I personality. She was emotional, and she would just wear her heart on her sleeve. And I knew that when she had a situation to talk about, the best thing I could do was just listen. I may have had the answer 3 seconds into her meeting with me, but I let her talk. That was really important. And I let her get it out, and I empathized, and I asked open-ended questions and tell me more. What about this? And I just needed to understand that, because once she felt understood, then she was going to go back and be more productive from a work standpoint. So I would say, if I had to pick between the two, Allison, team building synergy, sales training is really effective with this, and we don't have time to get into that, but it can be used for any. I think an existing team, to understand who you are. People also enjoy when they see someone who's like, I knew you were going to be an S or an I. It's fun to see the inner dynamics of people when they do tests as a team, and they can start to identify and better relate to each other. We're just about at the top of the hour. I'll go through 1 or 2 more questions here, and then we're going to go ahead and stop the audio portion of the presentation. I'm cognizant of our time, and we had scheduled this for 1 hour. So we'll go through another question or so. Please continue to type in your questions. After we close the audio portion, we will stay online and answer questions directly online to you if you have additional questions. So here's a question that came in. This can be used in interviewing, but at the same time, you mentioned that the mismatch in personality job is normal. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How can we recruit based on DISC if the mismatch is not crucial? Again, there's not a clear black and white on this, because it's going to depend on the nature of your business. It's going to depend on the managers and the existing interrelationships that exist within a company. What I would say, as a leader and manager in my past careers, if I know the team that I'm hiring, how they're going to interact with each other, it can help me circumvent conflicts that may come in. For example, again, if I have a team that's strongly weighted on D personalities, I know they like to have control. And if I bring in more Ds, that may not necessarily be the best thing. Similarly, if I have a number of C personalities that are very detail oriented, someone coming in, again, assuming they're qualified for the job itself, but if they're more I-centric, they may look at things in a different perspective and say, you know what if we did it this way? And they may think more out of the box. That's how an I tends to process. Conversely, if I have a bunch of I's already on a team, I may want to bring in someone that's more C-centric, because they can add a level of procedure and a little bit more organization to something that may not be the strengths of the other teams. So again, it's not a black and white, and I'm happy to chat about this offline if you reach out to me at jeff.scott@section810.com, or hit the emails that you'll receive tomorrow. But it's not a black and white answer. It really does depend on a number of external factors, not the least of which is the existing culture within the company. So before we close that, any final comments from the group? Ksenia, anything you'd like to share?
Well, something I wanted to mention is that I think we are strong in one aspect of the DISC, but then we have other aspects as well, and they manifest in different situations in life. And some I'm higher, the next highest of my chart is I, and I feel like I'm I in a lot of situations in my life, and especially with friends, right? You don't want to be like super decisive and taking control. You want to be an I, you want to be an easygoing and a friendly person. And in other situations, you want to be more details oriented and focused and facts oriented. So it's not like black and white, you're one, but you're not another. These things manifest in different ways, in different areas of your life.
You're absolutely right on that. And yes, it's not one size fits all. Typically, we have a dominant trait and then a secondary, but we're well-rounded individuals. Sophia, anything you'd like to add here? I'm just going to change the screen as we go through.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think the analysis really helped me with the communication with my husband and my family. So I realized if you talk to a different people from a different type, you don't really have to treat them as you want to be treated. Like there's this Asian wisdom of treat someone as you want to be treated, right? So like my husband, he has a type C, very strong type C personality. So if I really talk to him with the full story in my head, he will switch off because he just wants to focus on the facts. Yeah.
Very true. That inner dynamic is interesting. Sahan, any final thoughts from your perspective?
Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
I guess in the situation, given the given situation, all of us need to be more cognizant of what the other person might be going through in general. So my advice would be like people would be working from home, but taking care of their kids, their parents, and then like there might be someone in their house there who's sick. So we need to make sure like when we're also task oriented when it comes to work, but at the same time we might have to like redesign, replan, and push our deadlines a little further away, be cognizant of all the situation, and then react accordingly. That would be.
I agree. I think being aware, that's one of the key areas. That's one of the reasons we wanted to do the session today. It's just to help self-awareness and awareness of those around us. And Yelena, final thoughts.
First of all, thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity to be part of this session. And I just wanted to say that, well, knowing that I'm a C, I think it helped me to be less hard on myself, because all my background has always been related to either HR or to communicating with people, and I have never had real difficulties with that. But I'm not an I. I'm totally not an I, and that only means probably that I communicating with people and going out socializing is not the first thing I want to do in the morning, but still. And also I have always noticed that I do tend to overthink, to overanalyze, and to and sometimes I thought it got in the way of my work, that it wasn't good, that I wasn't good enough because of that I was too slow. But when I realized that that it's just the way that I am, and that I realized that maybe a positive thing, and it's just it's my strengths actually, because I can pay more detail to some facts than others, and maybe that can help me not to miss some things that can be missed by other people. So it's just that this knowing who I am just helped me to accept that and deal with that and take advantage of this knowledge.
Great. And that makes total sense. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining. On screen is a list of upcoming webinars. Again, all webinars in the month of April are no cost. We hope you'll take advantage of this time to enhance some of your soft skills with what we're offering. Feel free to join us and register. And again, we do plan on making the recording of today's session available as long as we didn't have technological challenges to make that available to you as well. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for joining us. I know we're a few minutes afterwards, but thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again. Once again, we'll turn off our webcams now and shut the phone lines down, but we will go ahead and stay online for any questions that you have until the questions are completed. So thank you once again, everyone. Okay, it looks like we've answered just about all the questions here, so we'll close the session. Thank you once again for joining. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.